where we saw the Tanzanian, Ugandan and Kenyan budgets being released. And joining us live from our studios over in Nairobi, Kenya right now is Charles Muchene. He's of PwC, he's the country leader over on that end, and will be taking us through some post-budget analysis, especially focusing on Kenya right now. Charles, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We've got the Kenyan government set to raise spending by 23.7% in order to boost development and stimulate the economy. What were your overall impressions of the budget, first of all?
Well, the minister did impress us quite a lot because he came up with what we consider to be a fairly bold budget, and he said so himself. Bold in the sense that he took measures that the government has not taken in the past, like increasing government spend in order to stimulate demand. He also presented the budget in a manner that most ordinary Kenyans can understand, unlike ministers in the past who presented budgets and talked about what they are going to put into various government ministries. He was talking more about outputs. So he was speaking at the level of the ordinary Kenyan. We were a bit surprised that he was planning on achieving a 10% increase in revenue, whilst the measures he was taking around taxation were actually going to reduce his revenue. But I think he'll be able to sort that one out. But overall, given the circumstances, I think he presented a pretty good budget.
That's exactly a key point here, because how exactly is he planning to sort this all out? I mean, just looking at some of the tax exemptions he's made here, we're looking at in the cosmetics and beauty sector, for example, duty on jewelry being removed to make them more affordable. In the mobile phone sector, the budget has proposed to exempt VAT on all cellular handsets. So where's revenue collection going to be coming from? Because one would assume that these are arenas that are considered luxuries and should be gotten a benefit from. Actually,
the tax reductions are not as big as they sound. Cosmetics and jewelry do not constitute a significant proportion of the spend of the ordinary Kenyans. And therefore, the revenue from those items is not that huge. Plus, he is also giving certain incentives which will provide incentives for investors to go outside the built-up areas. These are timing differences, and the revenue will eventually come in. But I think the key to the question that you've just asked is that we're going to see a more aggressive and a more innovative revenue authority. The revenue authority just will have to cast its net much wider, because we know there are people who ought to be paying tax and have not been paying tax in the right way, and the authorities will just have to devise ways of catching up with them. And I think a more efficient revenue collection authority will help the minister achieve his objective in that area.
That on the one hand, and then we've got the issue of domestic borrowing at hand. I mean, Kenyatta certainly sought to reassure anxiety over borrowing, that it won't push up interest rates and in turn crowd out private sector investment. Have you been reassured?
I have. Actually, I think he was very persuasive in that area. If you look at the debt ceiling that we have got right now vis-a-vis the GDP, we actually do have headroom when you benchmark Kenya against other nations at similar stages of development. So there is that headroom. And when you look at the stress that might cause onto the economy, one, it's the crowding out effect. But I think what he's going to do, and it's quite clear in his budget, is he's going to try and speed up government spend. So if the government does borrow from the market and spends that money quite quickly, then that money will find its way back into the system, and there will be no crowding out. So the real key to it is how quickly the government can get the spend going. And he has made taken some steps to help achieve that by passing on a lot of the budget, significant proportions of it, to the grassroots, where decisions will be made much faster, leaders will be held much more accountable by the people, and hopefully using the resources that are available locally, we'll be able to disburse much faster than has been the case when a lot of these funds were controlled at the center.
We're looking at a deficit, of course, sitting currently at 6.6% of GDP. It's being forecast that it will drop to 4.2% of GDP over the next financial year. Looking at the overall economy, what's your growth forecast for this year?
Well, we are coming from a growth of 1.7. The government is predicting 3%. I think with the measures that the minister articulated in the budget yesterday, 3% should be within reach, but it all depends on how quickly we can disburse the funds, how quickly the decisions can be made, because in the past we've had a major bottleneck when it comes to drawing down on resources that are available at the ministries or even with the donors, such that we wait until the end of the year when there's a big rush to try and spend it. If we do that, then we will not achieve that growth. However, if we start moving now, it is within reach. And so the real test is in implementation. As is always the case with some of these things, we normally get the policy articulation right, but the real test is in the follow-through and whether we are going to achieve what we set out to achieve.
Well, certainly we'll be tracking developments there. Thanks so much, Charles, for having joined us this afternoon. It was a pleasure chatting to you.
Okay, my pleasure as well.
That, of course, Charles Muchene of PwC joining us live from our studios over in Nairobi, Kenya. Before we cross